Good evening, everyone. I'm Adam Alexander. Welcome into Speed Center. There is breaking news in the motorsports world this evening. This afternoon, the IZOD IndyCar Series scheduled to run their season finale in Las Vegas. The championship on the line for drivers Dario Franchitti and Will Power. But unfortunately, tragedy struck on lap 12 of the race. Dan Whelden, a two-time Indy 500 champion and a former champion of the IZOD IndyCar Series, lost his life in that crash. We look at what happened this afternoon in Las Vegas. There you see Dan before the event, posed and ready to go racing, trying to win a $5 million bonus in this race. But as we told you, a scary, scary moment at lap 12. Dan, one of the 15 drivers involved in this crash, right in the middle of your screen, Whelden catapulted into the catch fence. Safety crews worked around his race car for quite some time. He was eventually airlifted to a local medical center. We ride on board with championship contender Will Power, another one of the drivers that was airlifted to Las Vegas Medical Center and got turned upside down. We see it one more time from a different angle. You could definitely feel the impact of this crash riding on board with Will Power. And again, middle of your screen, you see Dan Whelden in the catch fence. Shortly after 6 p.m. Eastern Time, Randy Bernard, CEO of the IZOD IndyCar Series, made this announcement to the media in the media center at Las Vegas Motor Speedway.
IndyCar is very sad to announce that Dan Whelden has passed away from unsurvivable injury. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family today.
Here you can see the drivers called to a meeting by IndyCar officials. In that meeting, they were told of the news of Dan's passing. And you can see crew members sharing their thoughts and prayers for Dan and his family. And once the drivers were released from that meeting, they shared the news with their crews. It was an emotional time, no doubt, but they made the decision they wanted to go on track and put 5 laps on the board in honor of Dan. And you can see the emotion of Dario Franchitti, a longtime friend of Dan Whelden's. And not just the drivers paying tribute to Whelden, the crew members on pit road paying their respects, as well as the safety officials at the race this afternoon. Those same safety officials that were called to Dan's attention after the crash. And there you see the number 77 atop the scoring pylon. That, of course, the number of the car that Dan was driving today for Sam Schmidt Motorsports. We welcome in Ray Evernhand to our coverage of the situation in Las Vegas today. Certainly a tragic loss for everyone in the motorsports world. Dan at one time aspired, Ray, to be a NASCAR driver, and he knocked on your door. Tell us what your relationship with Dan Whelden was.
After Dan won his Indy championship, he and his agent wanted to explore NASCAR. And that time I was a team owner of the Dodge program. And Dan came and spent a day at our shop, come around, look at the cars, and spend some time in my office, talk about what he wanted to do and NASCAR and things like that. We never certainly got to put Dan in a car, but very dynamic and polished young man.
No doubt about it. If you ever saw Dan at the racetrack, if you ever had an opportunity to meet him, the one thing that stood out about him is that $1 million smile that he always carried. Ray, you and I so often watch races, and the one thing that stands out is the amazing safety, because we are so accustomed to these crazy crashes. Drivers climb from their cars and walk away. That's what makes situations like this so difficult.
It does. You know, since we put man and machine together for sport, it's had brutal days. Today is one of those brutal days. And things have evolved. Safety's evolved. But things like this still happen. They're traveling at a high rate of speed. And again, accidents like this happen. And hopefully we learn what we can do to make these accidents less severe. Safety is certainly on everyone's mind, but we have to remind ourselves constantly, these guys are in danger when they're going around the racetrack. They're racing out there, and they are in danger.
Jake Query now joins us live from the racetrack at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Jake, a reporter for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway radio network. Jake also hosts a local radio show in Indianapolis, certainly has been well schooled in the IZOD IndyCar Series over the years. Jake, thanks for being with us in the Speed Center. And if you would, I know you have a relationship with Dan, tell us what your relationship was with Dan, and maybe just a note on what a great personality he had.
You know, Adam, I think when I think about Dan Whelden, the first thing I think is, I was born and raised in Indianapolis, and being a native of Indianapolis, winners of the Indianapolis 500-mile race just have a different aura about them, and the respect level that you have for an Indianapolis 500 champion is simply that you look at it and you think that is a man who has won the Indianapolis 500. And Dan Whelden was perhaps the first driver that I had the fortune to be around on a regular basis and cover and work with, if you will, who had won and accomplished that feat. And the more I was around him, the more the normalcy of him as a person came out. And the fact that Dan Whelden was a guy who made you feel like you were his friend, and he made you feel like you were important when you were around him, because he had that kind of a personality. He had that kind of a depth and that kind of a vibrance about him. He was fearless. He was someone who, of course, had won 16 races in this series. He had won 2 Indianapolis 500s.